Goedenavond. Ik ben Thomas van Smak. Ik zal verder gaan in het Engels voor Joachim. I would like to start by welcoming all of you to this lecture of Joachim Koester, which is organized by the KASK and SMAK as part of the KASKlezing and in the context of the exhibition of Joachim, which is opening the day after tomorrow at SMAK. So you're all very welcome there too. There we will be showing 20-something works that give a profound overview of Joachim's oeuvre from 1999 till 2012. So we're showing all the works which have not been shown for, I think, over 10 years, to brand new work which has been produced especially for the exhibition. As you will see on Thursday, the work of Joachim is a rather complex web of docufiction in which historical, personal and journalistic issues meld together with fictional narratives, and well, Joachim will now talk about 5 of his works in the exhibition and maybe unravel this web a bit for you, maybe not. But yeah, thank you for coming with so many people, and enjoy the lecture. Joachim will speak for about an hour, I think, and then there's time for questions if you like. So, thank you.
So thank you so much for inviting me. It's an exciting place to talk. I'll probably speak for more or less like 40 minutes. So right now we are doing the show at SMAK, and I guess that has made me think about what it could be to do a show, and especially struck me how much a show is also like a photography, a kind of a space, so to speak, or a map almost. There's a physical engagement, the choreography of the show, what is bodies moving through spaces and engaging with the work one by one. But there's also a kind of a mental map of mental topography, which is that of connecting one thing to another, which is also part of, at least, what I find very exciting about doing shows or bringing works together. This topography that is about a sort of mind space, or it's of course more elusive in the sense that, and maybe the point is not so much to find one route as also to stray and allow ourselves to lose ourselves in this kind of mental landscape and also maybe by losing ourselves a little bit, finding new pathways, conceptual pathways, narrative pathways, mental pathways, through these different mental pathways that connects these different cultural images, and cultural images that sometimes even might resemble a wilderness. So the whole idea of connecting different works is very close to kind of entering a space and then maybe following certain pathways of trying to find new pathways, or even kind of venture into spaces where we don't quite know what we are seeing and where we are. So what I'm doing here is that I'm connecting 5 works, and the title of this lecture is Of Spirits and Empty Spaces. So that is one way to connect a few of the works in the show, and of course many others. I'll start by mentioning what I call the invisible index of things, an archive of blind spots and minor histories that can take the form of spaces and practices. Perhaps my talk can be seen as a pledge for these kind of practices that hold the potential for change where a different kind of identity and thinking can emerge, though sometimes only for a brief moment. An example of this could be the ayahuasca ceremony. According to the anthropologist Miguel Tausig Jäger, or ayahuasca visions opens up constellations of the unknown, obtuse meanings, a space of chance and perhapsness. The ayahuasca ritual becomes a place where colonial issues and embodied memories can be staged and maybe even resolved in a completely different way due to the disorderly nature of the intoxication and the ceremony. So ayahuasca is a very strong psychoactive brew that is mainly done in a ceremonial way in the Amazon, and that is where and Tausig thinks that because of this, the intoxication, and because of this space is so riddled by chance and perhapsness, it is actually a space that allows people to resolve difficult issues or colonial issues, political issues or personal issues in a completely different way, simply because the whole ritual itself allows for something completely surprising to happen. Another example could be the Tarantism ritual, which is the focus of the next film that I will show. But I'll start in Cefalo, Sicily, at the hollow, dilapidated building that once housed Alice Krause's esoteric experiment, the Abbey of Thelema, in the 1920s. The history of the occult is also the history of the obscure, a history of ideas shrouded in secrecy, seeping through the centuries, before suddenly resurfacing in the mystic 1960s and settling as a minor but constant presence within mainstream consumer culture. Maybe the Abbey can be seen as a monument to this trajectory of the occult, its transformation from obscurity to mainstream assimilation today. And this is the Abbey you see behind me. Crowley and his devotees were kicked out by Mussolini after only 3 years. The villa subsequently sat abandoned for more than 30 years, maybe also forgotten, sleeping, until the experimental filmmaker Kenneth Anger in 1955 refound the villa and obtained permission to remove the whitewash which now covered the walls. Anger spent 3 months working on the walls and floors, gradually revealing what he called all those hyper-psychedelic murals in the Room of Nightmares, and on doors and shutters, planning a photo shoot on location in which the costume of the sorcerer in the dreamy film Children of Paradise, a blue velvet robe embroidered with the word Abra, would appear. Whether the shot actually happened is unclear. Anger's documentary made during his stay was lost by pulse on television. What still circulates is a series of photographs of the restored Abbey. One of them depicts Anger in conversation with sexologist Alfred C. Kinsey. On the back wall is Crowley's portrait, and on the door one of the newly uncovered painting, a mountainous landscape made in fantasy-like style. Anger had met Kinsey when the doctor approached him to purchase a print of his first film, Fireworks. While Anger was an ardent follower of Crowley's magic, Kinsey thought that Crowley was the most prominent fraud that ever lived. Kinsey nevertheless saw Crowley as a brilliant homoerotic writer and was interested in discovering more information about Crowley's sex magic practices. More than likely, it was Kinsey who founded Anger's stay in Cefalo. That's the entrance to the Room of Nightmares window. In some places, the wall that separates the worlds is especially thin. For me, that does not relate to an easy access to the spirit realm. Rather, it's a realm of ideas and connection, which is accessible. Maybe one could say that about works as well, artworks. The video is titled 1+1+1 as an allusion to Godard's film of Rolling Stones rehearsing Sympathy for the Devil from 1968. At the time of the recording, the Stones were hanging out with Kenneth Anger in London. He was their private visit and the inspiration for their satanic phase, which ended shortly after. I want to make another connection. When I came to Cefalo in May 2006, I discovered to my surprise, because the house was not in a pleasant state at all, that a young guy from Amsterdam named Daniel had squatted the ruin, laying out his sleeping bag directly on the dirty tiles. I asked him if he wanted to work on the film since we were all going to be there a lot, and he seemed quite pleased with that. He made tea and other things and kept his dog quiet when we were recording sound. On one afternoon, as we were taking a break from long deals of filmmaking, he decided to tell me about a ritual in southern Italy where people were bitten by spiders and hung from the ceiling in strings. Tarantism is a condition resulting from the bite of the wool spider, known as a tarantula. The bite causes numerous symptoms in the victim: nausea, difficulties in speech, delirium, heightened excitability and restlessness. The bodies of the bitten are seized by convulsions that previously could only be cured by a sort of frenzied dancing. Even the Bishop of Bolgano, who in the 17th century allowed himself to be bitten to disprove the cure, felt compelled to dance to relieve his symptoms. This dancing cure, called the tarantella, emerged during the Middle Ages as a local phenomenon in the area of the city of Galatina in southern Italy, and was widespread in the region up until the middle of the 20th century. Since then, the tarantella has evolved from a form of uncoordinated movement where people would quiver and hurl their heads, shake their knees, grind their teeth, and make the actions of madmen into a highly stylized dance for couples. So I went to it was like a year after I had met Daniel. I went to southern Italy to do some research. I was aware that the tarantism, as it was described, had more or less been very much in its twilight in the late 50s and more or less disappeared. But I was still curious to kind of find out more. And I stayed at a kind of a small farm, that had been made up to a hotel. And there, the owner of this farm, his name was Rico, and he actually played in the original rituals back in the 40s and even in the 50s. So he was very old. He was 90. So he would tell me how, through a translator, how it would happen. And he would say it would usually happen in the hot months of July and August when people were doing field work. And all of a sudden somebody would scream, "I have been bitten." Usually it was like 60% women and 40% men. That's Ernesto de Martino and anthropology that estimates that. But somebody would scream, "I've been bitten," and immediately they would kind of get in the musicians, would come on a horse carriage, like an ambulance almost, and they would kind of bring the person on the horse carriage, and already at this point the person would start to move. And then the whole ritual would take from 2 to 4 days until the person had kind of moved, or the person had moved their way through the poison or whatever was kind of like in their bodies, so to speak. So Ernesto de Martino, who was an anthropologist, would do some films of it, and they still, I think some of them are now on the internet. They're quite interesting, where you see a woman kind of moving around. Very often would they have a kind of a piece of cloth that's only prop that I conserved from the original ritual. As for my work, I more or less kind of read what I've just written to you, to the dancers. It's filmed in Brussels, and then almost immediately after we started filming. So it's for me kind of a conceptual territory, a realm of the body, kind of a terra incognita in the body kind of out of control or speaking its own language. One of the things at SMAC that I've been myself quite excited about is the juxtaposition of this work called My Frontier is an Endless Wall of Points with time tools, and they're shown side by side. And this is a 16mm film animation made from the mescaline drawings of Henri Michaud. Of all Michaud's work, these drawings are most frequently described as a venture into foreign territory. They can be seen as an exploration of the vast world on the borderline of words. In Miserable Miracles, Henri Michaud writes that he attempts to circumnavigate his own private Spitsbergen when taking mescaline. I'm sure that he is humorously paraphrasing the Arctic explorer Simon August André, whose expedition took off from Spitsbergen to conquer the North Pole in a balloon in 1897. Curiously, the same year mescaline as an alkaloid was identified and isolated by Arthur Hefter in Germany. There's an image in the show of the balloon kind of going northwards, and I think that has always had an enormous resonance, and it's been a very well-known image. So I think that is what Michaud refers to when he wrote about circumnavigating his own private Spitsbergen. To me, Michaud's drawings are one example of how exploration turns inward in the 20th century, when the notion of the unknown is no longer tied to the geography. Instead of the new realms to be discovered are interior, the molecule is born the unconscious, or language ghettos time. In my installation, I have treated Michaud's drawing and the lost photographs from the André expedition, which appears in the work Message from André, in the same way as remains from a journey. What André hoped to find in the uncharted wastelands of the North Pole is obvious: fame, imperial expansion, and a new world to plant the Swedish flag in. What Henri Michaud sought to find at the outskirts of his mescaline-infused mind is far more ambiguous. In fact, he was not so much exploring as being drawn by mescaline, and this did not fare well with him. Michaud was not ready to be ghost-ridden by a drug, contrary to, for instance, William Burroughs, who was quite happy with it. But I want to point to another link between Michaud and André and their explorations inward and outward. This has to do with the notion of technology. André would load the balloon with scientific instruments carefully designed in chrome and brass. They add a Jules Verne-like quality to the enterprise. Most of these are made utterly useless in seconds by the fact that the steering lines, the single most important invention of the expedition, failed to work immediately after takeoff. And in fact, they knew they were doomed at that point. It was like in half an hour they had lifted from the ground. This showed how Arctic exploration and the technologies involved were closely and often fatally tied to a specific aesthetic. If we see mescaline as a technology, Michaud's drawings can be read along these lines, as an exploration into the unknown, as an exploration of the unknown, not only as a conceptual construct, but also as a journey into a technology and its aesthetics. Michaud diligently attempts to document the worlds that appear behind his closed eyelids, an experience that is equally hard to translate into words or drawings. It's a highly charged venture, almost electrical. I think this electric field can be associated with the body movements of Tarntism. For me, both works deal with activities that momentarily, at a certain point in history, allows different or new identities to emerge. I didn't mention that Tarntism appeared in the 17th century as a parasite of the Catholic Church. In fact, it's a camouflaged pagan ritual developed in a peasant society which had few other technologies for developing the self-available. So this space of being bitten by the spider that gave access to pools of uncoordinated or free bodily movements became extremely charged psychologically. People would be bitten to dance out of distress or an uncertain situation like a looming marriage. In this sense, the ritual of Tarntism can be perceived as a manual for bodily and social transgression. In a way, also Crowley will be, I think in my opinion, remembered as a great transgressor, and his practices will be almost is a manual of how to transgress the 19th century Victorian mind, which he never succeeded in because paradoxically he never really overcame his own social background. He always, no matter what transgressive magic rituals, no matter how much drugs he took, he always was kind of an Englishman of a certain class, with all that implies. Anyway, in this sense, the ritual of Tantism can be perceived as a manual for bodily and social transgression. Ernesto de Martino concludes the anthropologies that Tantism is a tool for evoking and configuring psychic conflicts. And the title of his book contains a wordplay. The land of remorse also means the land of the rebite, or the land of the rebitten, since people had a tendency to be bitten again and again. So I'm going to continue on this trail of mescaline the unknown and the body, but this time venturing into an even more ambiguous territory of the trickster. To navigate in a genuine way in the unknown necessitates an attitude of daring, but not one of recklessness. Movements generated from the magical passes of Carlos Castaneda. In the summer of 1960, the anthropology student Carlos Castaneda was introduced by an old friend. It was introduced by a friend to an old Yaqui Indian in a Greyhound bus station on the border of Arizona and Mexico. The Indian's name was Don Juan Matos. He was a sorcerer, a brujo, who knew about the preparation and use of mushrooms and other psychedelic plants, a topic Castaneda was excited to get information about for his research. The conversation was brief and awkward, but shortly after, Castaneda traveled to the desert of Sonora, Mexico, to meet Don Juan again. Many more visits will follow. Eventually, Don Juan agreed to taking Castaneda as an apprentice and teach him about medicine plants and the sorcerer's way. The story of Castaneda's remarkable apprenticeship that included several experiences with peyote and the notorious halogenic plant datura, speaking with lizards, and a near-fatal meeting with a malicious witch, which were later chronicled in his book, The Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge, from 1968. The book proved to be enormously successful. Not only was it favorably reviewed and widely read, it was also considered a breakthrough in anthropology, and Castaneda was later awarded a PhD for his research. It was incredible. I think it has also inspired somebody like Tausig. As readers all over the world devoured Castaneda's field notes, some even hunted the Sonora deserts for Don Juan to be taken in as apprentices themselves. Castaneda responded to his newfound fame by following the advice of the old sorcerer. He veiled his personal history in a web of secrecy. The teachings of Don Juan ends by Castaneda giving up his apprenticeship and leaving the world of sorcery behind. Yet, over the next 2 decades, he wrote many new titles, expanding on his magical journey. These were the extended shamanic instructions on how to see, dream, master an unordinary reality, and ultimately become a woman or man of power, taught by the enigmatic and patient Don Juan. The tales were captivating, terrifying, and occasionally beautiful. I reread the book, The Teachings of Don Juan, when I was doing this project, and I was actually thrilled again, which was kind of nice. They are very seductive. Just as often, Castaneda's tales were incomprehensible and tedious, featuring a hard-headed Castaneda struggling to understand the sorcerer's world. Castaneda revealed the final lesson of Don Juan in his book Magical Passes. It was a secret set of exercises deployed for navigating the dark sea of awareness. According to Don Juan, sorcerers has practiced these movements for centuries in order to enhance their perception of ordinary reality. Curiously, also in the book, Don Juan speaks for the first time of his mentor, a sorcerer and Mayan named Julian Osorio living in Mexico at the beginning of the 19th century. Julian Osorio was a professional actor who would pour all his efforts into creating what he named the shamanistic theater. Dan Juan recalls, every movement of his characters was imbued to the gills with the magical passes. Not only that, but he turned the theatre into a new avenue for teaching them. Magical Passes was published in 1998, the same year that KASKlezing died. By then, the contradictions and inconsistencies in his life and books had become so pronounced that few believed Don Juan ever existed. Castaneda always claimed that the magical world found him by chance, at that encounter in the Greyhound bus station, but his wife, Margaret Runyon, writes in her memoir that at the time, magic was already his obsession. Despite that, or maybe because of it, Castaneda's fictitious apprenticeship and his transformation into a mystic master were in fact magical. So this is the last work I'm going to show and talk about. And it's called Of Spirits and Empty Spaces. And it's also featured in a show with SMAC. It's a newer piece. I finished it here in 2012. John Murray Spear was a spiritualist, socialist, activist, and agitator for many causes, among these the free love movement and women's liberation. In 1861, at the end of his life, and after many different and failed ventures, Spear initiated a series of seances in the Domain, a new spiritualist settlement in Kirton, New York, upstate New York. Guided by the channel spirit of Benjamin Franklin, Spear and his small group tried to invent a new kind of sewing machine through a trance dance. At the time, Elias Howe had already developed a successful and widely distributed sewing machine. Howe had secured strong patents on all his innovations, which made the machine too expensive for ordinary people to buy. The aim of the seances in the Domain was to bypass the existing patents to find a blueprint for a sewing machine built on completely different principles. The new machine would be significantly cheaper to produce and provide much needed funds for Spear's group, as well as the individuals buying it. Spear was convinced that the drawings for the new sewing machine already existed in an immaterial form in the spirit realm, and that he had found a key to access them. And when I was just reading through this, I thought, that's kind of like a show maybe. That the ideas are already there, and the show is the key to access them. Though not fully expressed, they kind of can be gleaned, or maybe after a time they will kind of seep through the images. In the workshop where the seances took place, the participants were each assigned roles. They would enter trance and become fully automated parts of the machine, each enacting the essential movements and together forming a model for its action in a working whole. So they would basically go into trance, and then each one of them would become a part of this imaginary sewing machine. After an intermission of sleep and dreams, the translations of the dance were noted down, and sometimes machine parts were produced in wood and metal. Spear's visionary approach to functional innovation extended to his grand plan for its distribution and impact. The new sewing machine would revolutionize the relations between the sexes by giving women an opportunity to make enough money to take control of their lives. Not only that, the machine embodying and expressing a bisexual nature would revolutionize the industry as well. Spear and his group made a prototype and started production. Though it is unlikely that their machine worked significantly better or different than other models at the time, it certainly did not sell well, even at a low price. They did little better than break even. Yet it would be misleading to understand the efforts of Spear and his group only as a somewhat odd and failed enterprise. Spear's quest was informed by an almost desperate desire to find an alternative to corporate industrial production, and his method, the seances in the workshop, might be seen as a unique experiment in social interaction involving performance and dance. So when I came across the material, I was just really fascinated about this dance that, in some way, to me, resembled something that could have been done in the kitchen in New York in the 70s. So I treated it almost like a movement piece, or a performance, but through words. So my works, which are featured in this kind of like hypnagogic mist, which are these dots that are on the screen. It's kind of like sometimes I call it a dust narrative, because they look like little stars or little dust specks. So my narrative is almost like seeing the ritual as it appeared, or as it is described in the few documents that has survived. So in that sense, that would also be a kind of a space that, for a brief moment, allowed a different social interaction and different identities to emerge, and at least held the hope of an alternative to, which at that time was corporate industrial production, which now would be more termed the global economy. So thank you. That's what I had. So I don't know if there's any questions. There doesn't have to be any questions. I hope you will all come and see the show. I think will also be quite different than seeing the works here and finding your pathways to kind of make connections in the different works. In that sense, I guess that could also be another metaphor for a show. That would be a machine. A machine that kind of throws off narratives and ideas.
Yeah. I just wondered if you tried the ayahuasca mescaline spider bites yourself, or you just studied the reaction of human beings as an anthropologist.
No, I didn't. I mean, in New York I did ayahuasca, and actually quite a lot of the. I tried not to study it. I mean, study other people's reactions because I would find that improper. One should give out some privacy. But I must say that a lot of the electricity comes from there, and the sense of electricity can be really such a highly charged thing. So people sometimes their hands are shaking, or and they can't stop it, and stuff like that. So I think like let's look a little bit.
Yeah, just if you look at it from a distance, or if you went through the experience yourself.
Well, I took it myself, so of course, yeah. So you know, I felt it as well. Which would be more like the I'm really sure, I think. The sense of something vibrating through the body, or the sense of magnetism or electricity in the body, which might just be it's quite also can be hard on the stomach. So I mean, sometimes it's not that far from just being food poisoned. and hallucinations at the same time. I think those two works that it went for the rhythm of the mature mescaline drums and for the movements and sounds. It was a little bit of a kind of a beacon for me, how I perceived that or felt that. So.
There was of course a lot of research in the work,
Uh-huh.
but I was like really curious if this kind of how much sense of objectivity is in that research, because for example with the Taranta story, I know there are more theories where the dance comes from.
Okay, yeah.
Because like coincidence, I researched a little bit on that, but it's like one particular like narrative you found, like maybe enough for you to create a new or to explore more narratives, or is it really the intention to have kind of objective view on a specific theme? Or
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't know what it would mean to have an objective view in that sense.
of course, it's always subjective because it's an artistic position. But
Yeah.
it's really
But I don't really. There's a. I was just. I think sometimes I describe it that the work gets a certain momentum. I mean, the work kind of. It's vague, but you know the material, so to speak, expresses itself. So which is more of a kind of artistic guideline. I think for Tarantism it was not so much about. I did in Ernesto de Martino's. I read that book and spoke with people there, and I guess it's kind of contested whether they were bitten or not. I think Martino also says that some were bitten, some were not. Some were rebitten. Rico, for example, would say that the reason that Tarantism, I mean, I obviously think that Tarantism died as a phenomenon because other things came, like psychoanalysis or maybe the society. So there was not a need for that space so much anymore. But Rico would say that the reason that, in his opinion, that the reason that Tarantism didn't kind of die was that there was no manual fieldwork, so people were not bitten by spiders. And also the spider itself, the spider is depicted as a wolf spider, which is not poisonous. But there's another spider that is poisonous. And there's back to many years before Tarantism, there is written accounts of people being bitten by that spider and having symptoms that is to some degree similar to the ones in Tarantism, sort of spasms in the body. So, but I don't really. But I don't feel the need to I don't think, I never put anything in the work, like also in this work that is running behind me. There's nothing there that I kind of made up, so to speak. But whether it's objective, I don't know. It's part of the material, I would say. That's how I would explain it. That for Tarantism, I had a very specific agenda with it. Something that I wanted to explore with the dancers.
While you were speaking, I was noticing a continuity in your images, and I wanted to ask you if you could speak a little more about how you approach filmmaking, and in particular, I was curious your choice of black and white.
Yeah. Sometimes the choices can be very low pragmatic. For Tarantism, we had a limited budget, and we were sponsored by theater, and part of the sponsorship were the lights, which were theater lights, and theater lights they will move in temperature. So we turn them off and they're slightly colder, and then they get hotter and hotter as they burn, which would make it like a nightmare to match the shots. So that definitely pulled me towards black and white. I think some things are more visible in black and white. You see more structure, like the clothes they have on, or the clothes more than the mind and the magical parts that stand more out in black and white as it would do in color. So I just did, and I think you can, in the show you'll see there's one work and a few works and they're both color, black and white. So I kind of started with color and then I moved to color and black and white and then I moved into black and white and now I'm going to show in January with my first color 16mm film. So it kind of I think I feel myself sliding into color again. So in a way, there's really no kind of explanation for it, any than a preference. At some point, I just thought color was so messy when you put it together, and yeah, black and white was just nice. And also, I started working with a color or a lab in New York, just do black and white prints, and that was it was very nice to work with them. So I did more and more. So.
And is everything shot on 16mm?
Yeah, on 16mm. Yeah. And what can I say about 16mm? I'm usually asked about that. I think one thing, if you feel it coming, I think one thing to at least acknowledge is that with a 16mm projection, you are always in the space with the print. That means if there's a scratch, and one print was really scratched immediately, badly, we might have to change it immediately after we turn it on. That scratch is specific for that print, and as it runs, it gets more and more scratched. It becomes more and more specific. So it is in a way always that moment, which I kind of like. I kind of like that it's specific. As for another thing is that a lot of my films don't have sound, and the projector itself provides sound, and it provides narrative momentum. It's as if the projector itself kind of like drives the action forward. A little bit like in the early days of filmmaking, when people were so intrigued by trains. I think it's because it reminded them of a camera and it reminded them of a narrative, something just going on and coming and coming. So I think maybe you feel that a little bit in a show. Maybe you feel that all those little scratches and all the dust and all those things, but maybe you don't perceive them, and maybe they're not even important, but maybe you do. As I was here earlier last week, I said that a show can also be inhaled. It can also be perceived in that way. It can also be perceived just walking through it and just kind of seeing it very briefly, just with the body moving through the spaces.
I thought for once in a moment you made that great smell of dust you get from the
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, it'll be a bit dusty smells as well, I promise. Anymore. All right, well, thank you so much.